Smile.
But I'm not happy.
People
Why are you
staring.
I don't want to do this.
You have to. They'll know
No one
something's
cares
wrong.
about your
Why
life.
is that bad?
Nobody cares. They won't understand.
Nobody
I want to go
cares.
home. You'll hurt their feelings.
This was ridiculous. What are
Why
we even
just
talking about?
like,
Once
just
you want
keep
to keep them
like
happy,
you. What if they
they're
think
gonna
you're
be
stupid?
mean.
Just
Just
keep
keep them
them
happy.
happy.
Just keep them happy. Just lie.
I'm not here to sugarcoat, life's already a bumpy road. Too much shelter causes pain, let's just be real honest. Things are gonna knock you down, avoidance will not help you out. Let's talk it through, here me and you, let's keep it real honest.
Hi, welcome to Real Honest. This is a podcast where I share candid thoughts and feelings about life, love, and relationships, God and church, adulting, the workplace, and everything in between. I am your host. My name is Samantha, and you probably / definitely will not always like me, but I will always be honest with you. Hi there. Good morning, good evening, good noontime, good middle of the night. I don't know, whatever time it is that you're listening to this. I feel like it's been forever. I think it's only been 2 weeks, but sorry, I got sick. I was trying to not have to. It takes me extra time to record this when I'm sick because I got to pause to cut out all the coughing so it doesn't irritate you guys. And I was like, I'll just wait till I don't have to do that. Also, we're going to do a super fun story behind the song today. But the man that the song was written about, I had a conversation with, and we decided that's going to have to be released at a later time. Anyway, so we're back to regular scheduled programming, starting with the goals check-in. So this is actually very exciting. I do have updates for you guys on my book. So I made a lot of progress. I think I have sent 2 chapters to my beta reader team since I was last on here. I also met with a story coach for the first time. That was really cool. And I have some accountability partners from my small group that have been helping out with productivity. I've been asked a lot lately when I'm going to finish my book and how close I am to being done. A lot of people ask how many pages it is. And it's really, I don't want to say it's annoying because I want people to be interested in my book and I want people to care about it. And I like talking about it. So when people are genuinely interested, I do want to answer the questions, but it's difficult because to talk to people that aren't writers, the questions just feel very generic. Like, just for example, maybe generic isn't the right word, but for example, in the writer community, people typically talk about word count. So it's like you have a word count goal for each session, you have a word count goal for the book. And it's like 50 to 60,000 words is like the estimate for like the average fiction book. But of course, if it's like fantasy, sci-fi, those tend to be a lot longer. If it's YA, they tend to be a little shorter. If it's a children's book, it tends to be shorter. So it just it all depends on your story. And then for people that are not writers, they usually don't care about word count because that doesn't mean anything to them. Like, if you're a reader, you might care about page count. Like, my sisters and I talk about that a lot. I have one sister that loves, her sweet spot is 200 to 300 words is a good size book for her. My other sister and I are give us 600 to 800 pages because we read really fast. So we like really, really long books that take us longer to get through. But even if you were to ask how many pages I anticipate my book being, it's not so simple as to say 100 words fit on a page, because it depends. What font are you using? What font size are you using? What size page is it being printed on? It's gonna change no matter what it is. So I say all that to say, it's very difficult to answer these questions when people ask me them. And even if you're a person who isn't super into reading and doesn't write, and you say oh, how many pages have I written? And I say 57, you have no context of is that a lot or is that a little? You would have context if I were to say my book is planned to be 100 pages and I've written 57. Then you would know that I am more than halfway through, but that's not something that I can actually know. So the best context that I can give you is that if we go with the estimate that the average novel is 50 to 60,000 words, I have currently written 24,000 words of this book. I was just kind of Googling like roundabout how many words / pages are in a chapter, and it told me like that 12 chapters would be roundabout 24,000 words. So I've hit the like where the 12 chapter mark would be. I've only written 6 chapters, and my chapters are not particularly long. Like I think my longest chapter is 8 or 9 pages and my shortest chapter is 3 pages. And this is on like a regular in a Google Doc. That's how long it is, because that's what I'm putting it into Google Docs just for my beta team to read. So if that gave anyone context to the questions that you ask, hope it was helpful. I'm sure it did not give context to most of you. The larger point in the progress being made is that I attended a writers' conference earlier this year, and that conference, the organizers of that conference put on additional events throughout the rest of the year that are all virtual. So I went to a webinar. I think I talked about this in my last episode, but I went to a webinar where they talked about like the narrative structure, of like the exposition, inciting incident, rising action, like turning point, climax, all that stuff. And while this is stuff that you learn in like middle school language arts class, so it's something that I was very familiar with, I had not thought of my book in the context of the narrative structure, mostly because I know how to tell a story, but also because I already wrote a book in my series and I never needed like any type of structure to write it. Like the book, the idea just came to me one day when I was 9 or 10 years old, and I just sat down and wrote it. My very first draft of my book, I have a finished copy of the book that I wrote when I was 10. It is printed out in a 3-ring binder. The cover, like I drew myself, and it's essentially a very long episode of Totally Spies starring me and my 5 best friends from elementary school. So obviously it has evolved way, way past that. Like it's no longer a long episode of Totally Spies. It's something completely different, completely original, which I love. Like I really, really love my story. But from that super long version of Totally Spies, it was basically just about me narrowing the characters, of like creating characters as opposed to just using myself and all my best friends, and then being like, okay, this story was already done on Totally Spies. Like what's something new that I could do? And just kind of moving things around. But essentially, I was just editing that same book for almost 15 years. And now that I'm working on, I've moved that book is now book 2 in my series. And what I'm currently writing is book 1. And what I am struggling with book 1 is that the whole story did not just come to me. Like essentially, I know that I'm writing a 5-book series about secret agents in training at boarding school. I know that the boarding school they go to is a 5-year program. So I'm going to do 1 book per year, but I don't have all mapped out like what happens in each year. I only know what happens in year 2 because that's the one that's completely written. So it helped me to sit down with the narrative structure in front of me and put it into the pieces of my story that I already have put into there, in terms of like, do I know what the inciting incident is? Do I know what the climax is? Because that helped me to structure it to see like how much do I have mapped out and how much do I need to add? And this is where the story coach came in. This was the person that put on the webinar that I was able to meet with one-on-one. And so I worked on my outline, which I gave to her ahead of our meeting. And then we went through the outline and she gave me feedback on it in terms of like, this you have happening in Act 2, that should actually be in Act 1. This doesn't seem like a fully fleshed out idea of what's happening in Act 3, but it seems like you're on the right track. And that was really, really helpful for me, because now that the outline is completely done and fleshed out, whenever I sit down, I can just write, which is where the accountability partners in my small group come in, because we have set up twice a week writing sessions where for 2 hours we all hop on Zoom. We keep our cameras off. I just play some like lo-fi chill music, and it's free. It's a free 2 hours for anyone to come and just write or study. You can use it as Bible study time, as like studying for school. I use it for writing my book. People use it for journaling, and it's just to have other people like with you but not with you, because it's distracting to like have our cameras on and be talking. We would just be talking the whole time and not actually get our work done. But it's nice to have designated time to just show up and get work done with other people. And also having my outline to follow. It's like I show up to my session and I'm like, for the next 2 hours, these are the scenes that I'm going to work on. And sometimes one scene takes longer than I expect. Like it might take me the whole 2 hours to write one scene. I might write 5 scenes in those 2 hours. But either way, things are trending in a positive direction. And I am confident that I will finish the book this calendar year. I hesitate to say that because I heard on a podcast recently that researchers somewhere did some study that said like psychologically, once you announce your goal, there's something that triggers in your brain that tells you that you already did the thing. And then it makes you actually less likely to get it done because part of your brain thinks that you've already done it. I listened to a very short clip from this podcast, so I didn't dive into like what was the study, what was the research done. I didn't Google it, so I don't actually know. But I'm curious. I want to put it out there to you guys. Like, do you find that when you share your goals with people, you're more likely to get it done or less likely? Please email realhonestpod@gmail.com with your answer, because I'd love to talk about it. I find that really interesting because one of the things for me, like it's helpful for me, maybe not to tell a lot of people. Like I don't necessarily post on social media every time I'm working on something, but I always have at least 1 or 2 friends that I share like my fitness goals with, because that helps me stay accountable to tell somebody like, I'm on day 8 of my 90-day program, and somebody to help cheer me on and stuff. And same thing with the book. It's really helpful for me to have my group of people who are reading my book, because thank you, Ashlyn, when she gets annoyed that she's been waiting too long for the next chapter, she will text me and be like, hey, am I getting a new chapter this month? Like nudge, nudge, super nice and sweet about it. But like that helps me stay on top of trying to write faster to make sure that I give her something to read. And then same thing with like having the writing time designated every week. Like it's nice to have other people that are coming and using the time not to write a book. It's like we're all doing something different that's productive, but we've all shared with each other what we're working on and what we're using the time for, so that we can help keep each other accountable to showing up and using the time for whatever it is that we want to work on to progress toward. So I don't know. I thought that was interesting because I have always found that sharing my goals and saying them out loud and writing them down makes me a lot more likely to do them. But at the same time, I have noticed that a lot of times in the past, at least with my book, like I told everyone and their mother that I was writing a book when I think it was in middle school. And I did write it, but then I put it down for like years and years and years and didn't work on like editing and publishing it. So that was kind of like, I'd put it down for a year and then work on it for 2 months, put it down for another year, work on it for 6 months. So I don't know. It would be interesting to know if that has something to do with my brain thought it was already done because I had told people about it. Moving into what I'm learning from God right now, I think it's around people in my life, like people that are in my life for reasons and people that are in my life for seasons or a lifetime, just being able to kind of identify who is what and who fits where, and really being able to let go and understanding the purpose of feelings in my life. I guess, let's see, how do I give an example of this? My pastor was talking about this past weekend. He mentioned that feelings come, but they don't come first. And we need to be careful not to allow the hurt to become greater than the harvest. And whenever I listen to a sermon, I always write down like where I feel it applies in my life. So specifically under the don't allow the hurt to become greater than the harvest, I wrote like, my emotions regarding my parents are valid, but I shouldn't allow that to become so big that I ignore the help that they have offered me. This is something that has come up a lot in my small group because I lead a millennial group. And for some, I don't know what it is about like the boomers and the millennials, but those two generations seem to just like really be butting heads. I think it's because so many of the boomers like refuse to go to therapy and millennials are like full on embracing therapy. And it's just like we spent all these years in therapy, like understanding generational trauma and how all of our childhood trauma shows up in our life today and makes relationships really hard for us. And then it's like, well, mom and dad, if you wouldn't have done XYZ when I was 7, then I would be okay and have healthy relationships. And there is a lot of truth to that. But I think that when we have these conversations with our parents, a lot of times what happens is they feel attacked and all they hear is, I was a bad parent. Everything that I did was wrong. I can't do anything right, blah, blah, blah. And maybe that's true. Like maybe they were a terrible parent. Maybe they were just okay parents. Maybe they were really great in one aspect of parenting and really poor in another. Something that I've mentioned on here before is like, I feel like my dad really viewed his role as a father as to being a provider. Like he looked at it kind of like checking things off a list of like, if my children are not hungry and if they have a roof over their heads and if they've gone to college, like I did it, check mark, I did all the things. Whereas I was very like, I needed way more emotional connection than I received from him. But I feel like for most of my life, I resented him for that. Like I was so angry at him for not providing the emotional closeness that I needed, that I wasn't able to appreciate like the physical things that he did provide, that I did always have my own room and he did pay for my undergraduate degree and really did set me up for success in a lot of ways that while I personally give more weight to my emotional relationships than I do to like money, for example, whereas my dad's the total opposite. I think it's something to still, I need to learn how to scale back and be able to say both of these things are true. Like you were really good at this thing and it really helped me in this way, but you were also really bad at this thing, which damaged me in this way. And the thing you were bad at that damaged me does not negate the thing you were good at that helped me, just as the thing you were good at that helped me does not negate the thing you were bad at that damaged me. It's like both of these things exist at the same time. And this leads into my topic today, which is happy is not the only positive ending. There's an influencer that I follow on Instagram who is like a relationship expert and recently was in this like long relationship, got engaged, was sharing a lot about it, wrote a book about relationships, and then found out that the person was cheating on her and like now the relationship ended. And she has shown like her whole grieving process on Instagram. She's shown like how she started dating again and how she cared for herself and remained healthy and still pursues new relationships. And she shared a post the other day that I saw where she was talking about like people kept asking her if she regretted talking about her relationship in her book since they didn't stay together. And she said, no, why should I? Like dating is still beautiful and love is still beautiful. And just because that relationship didn't end up being forever doesn't mean that it was bad. Like it was still the healthiest relationship that I've ever had. Communication was great. I was very in love. He was very in love. Like at the end of the day, you know, he betrayed me in a way that I wasn't willing to overlook because I have too much respect for myself. But I'm still not upset that it happened. I'm not wishing it away. And I just really, really admired that. Because it does pose the question, like, where did we get this idea? I mean, I know Disney, but where did we get this idea that happily ever after is the ending? That's the goal. And we're all constantly chasing happily ever after. Because I'm sure most of you have also heard, like, happy endings are for stories that haven't finished yet. Because if we think about life in terms of a story, it's like your story's not going to end until you die, and dying isn't a good thing. Like, that's sad. But the point of why we're here is really the journey. And I feel like so many of us miss that because we're chasing the happily ever after. We're chasing the job that's supposed to make us happy, the relationship that's supposed to make us happy, the baby or the pet or the clothes, or I don't even know what else, but like we're all chasing this thing that is supposed to give us happy ever after, where it's like, why can't there be positive endings that aren't happily ever after? Like maybe you go through a terrible marriage and you get divorced, and that is positive because it brings you both to a place where you're happy and you've learned and you've grown. And just because you didn't stay with that person forever, it doesn't mean you failed. It doesn't mean you'll never get happily ever after. It just means your happily ever after may look differently. The T Swift lyric I use the title of this episode is "You knew the hero died, so what's the movie for?" because it goes along with this sentiment of the topic of like, well, if I know that the hero is going to die, why am I even going to watch the movie? And this is something that I think about because I remember the first time that I saw Infinity War, I was so mad. And I know that it's a part one, but it's like we had to wait another year or two for Endgame. So it's like everyone's like, well, it's just part one. Like, everybody's gonna live. And I was like, okay, but in it standing alone, like as part one of Infinity War plus Endgame, together, those two movies are one of the most epic stories that will ever be told. But Infinity War on its own, start to finish, I absolutely hated because I was like, this is depressing. I was depressed from like 10 minutes into the movie until I finished. And like we watched the heroes lose, and this is terrible, and this is sad. And I now have totally changed my tune. I think it's a great movie. I absolutely love it completely on its own, not as a part one, because I no longer need happy endings. Like I just want to be moved. And I feel like the fact that I was connected enough to all the characters to be that sad the whole movie, like that's what made it important to me. You guys, I just watched the Amazing Spider-Man movies for the first time ever over the weekend. I know I'm super behind. I don't know what I was doing in 2012 and 2014, but wasn't watching those. But going into the second movie, I knew that Peter couldn't save Gwen because I've seen it like all over social media. I've heard people talk about it. It's alluded to in other movies. Like I knew the story, I just had never watched it. And so watching the first movie and like their super cute love story, and then the whole second movie, I was just waiting for her demise. And the whole movie, I was like, oh no, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? There's only 40 minutes left. There's only 30 minutes left. There's only 20 minutes left. And I was just panicking and was so sad. But I was like, even though I knew, which I know Spider-Man is technically the hero, not Gwen, but she's the hero to me. Even though I knew the hero was going to die, I still enjoyed the movie so much. Like I loved watching her journey. I mean, with Peter Parker, obviously, their journey together. Like it still was moving with it ending the way that it did. And if I just totally spoiled that to anyone, sorry, but the movie's really old now. And it was spoiled for me before I watched it, and it was still 10 out of 10. But I think the point here is just to reframe, try to retrain your brain on like what the definition of positive is, right? Because a lot of people would say, all right, so you said happy isn't the only positive ending, but sad is negative. And that's where I challenge you. Is sad negative? Sometimes, sure. But sometimes it's positive. Sometimes crying is very cathartic and you feel great after and you need it. Did you watch Inside Out? Did you watch Inside Out too? We need all of the emotions. But for real, an exercise that I encourage all of you to do is think of the things and the people in your life that are painful or negative experiences to you, and see if you can write down one or two ways that relationship did actually serve you in a positive way. So one of the big ones for me is that my 3 best friends when I was in high school, I mean, we had like a rotating slumber party between the 4 of our houses almost for a straight 3 years. And I would have bet money that the 3 of us were going to be bridesmaids in each other's weddings. We were going to be best friends forever. Absolutely nothing could tear us apart. And like we went to college and they dropped me like a hot potato. Like, I still to this day, I have a theory that it's just that I was really depressed in college and they didn't know how to handle it. But if that's not it, I truly do not know what it is that I did to get kicked out of this group. And I wonder it a lot. Like, I find myself on a random Wednesday, I'll just sit and be thinking, like, I wonder why they didn't love me anymore, really and truly. Because the three of them are still very close friends with each other, but like, they are not friends with me. And like, one of them's gotten married. I was not invited. And it was really, really hurtful. And for a long time, I feel like I was sad and angry because I was like, what was the point of having such beautiful, close friendships for so long if I wasn't going to get to be part of their weddings and meet their kids and grow old with them, you know? But it's like, okay, maybe their purpose was to get me through high school, because high school was a dream. I'm so sorry to everyone out there that hated high school. Hopefully you loved college, because that was my nightmare, but high school was a beautiful time for me, thanks primarily to these three girls. Like, it absolutely was wonderful. And same thing of after college, I went and did the Disney college program in California, and that was a hellish few months for me. Like, it just, from crazy roommate problems to the program just not quite being what was advertised, to being absurdly poor, to fighting with my parents. Like, I was just absolutely miserable. And the man that I dated during that time was like my bright light. Like, he really, I'm not advocating for anyone like being this dependent on another human for anything, but like, he gave me a reason to wake up every day. He gave me something to look forward to every weekend. Like, I just was so happy to have him. Like, he was my very best friend. I loved every date that we went on, and I was just so excited. And it was like, whenever I was in my like lowest moments, like, I would just call him and he would come pick me up, and we'd go driving around or walking around or whatever we could do at whatever time it was. And it really made all the difference in my experience. And even though we ended up dating for way longer than we should have, and then he ended up being married with 3 children and had lied about it the whole time, and then I was very dramatically very, very like more depressed than I was when I had met him. And I just spent the next many years going, why did this happen to me? Like, why did I have to experience this? What was the point of falling in love with this person if he was going to be so terrible? But the point isn't that he's terrible. You know, his purpose was to get me through a season of my life, and I wasn't able to see that I hung on to him way past that when he had already served his purpose and was supposed to be like in my life and out of my life. And a lot of times that's going to happen to us. Like, we don't get to know how long somebody is supposed to stick around. I think the more you tune in to your relationship with God, I think you'll be able to hear more clearly, like, hey, let's let that go. Or, okay, we can keep that one a little longer. But, you know, at the time, I wasn't there. I didn't have the skills. But I now look back on it like, that person did make my experience in the Disney program significantly better than it would have been without him. I also think it's important to remember that, like, we are all the hero in multiple people's stories, and we are also all the villain in multiple people's stories, whether it's true or not, and whether we know it or not. It might be really dramatic in the sense of like the man in California. I know that he spun a very crazy story where I am the villain, and I am just like some crazy person who like popped up in his life and seduced him and wouldn't leave him alone. If anyone's buying that, I mean, honestly, power to him, because the man's a brilliant actor. Like, I can't even take that away. He's great. But whether it's something totally dramatic and untrue like that, or if it's something like a while back, I told a story about my recent birthday trip to Disney and how I had a couple girls that came on the trip as my friends and left, and we never spoke again because some people say it's a misunderstanding. Other people are like, no, they totally shit on you on your own birthday. Like, come on now, they suck. But I'm sure, like, to me, they are the villain of that story. And to them, I assume that I am the villain if they tell that story. So you have to understand, like, we're all coming at life and every situation in life from a different lens with our own specific background and our own brains and the ways that we think about things. You know, you can do everything right and do everything with the absolute best of intentions and still end up the villain in someone's story. It could be so simple. Like, you might look at somebody the wrong way in the grocery store and it absolutely like kills their day, and they're overthinking and thinking like, oh my gosh, why did that stranger glare at me today? Like, what happened? What did I do? And maybe you didn't glare at them. Like, maybe you have resting bitch face and they just interpreted it wrong, but you don't know them, so they're not ever going to call you and say like, you killed my day making that face. Like, oh my gosh, you guys, I had a really hot history teacher in high school. I was obsessed with this man, and I felt so special because he was colorblind. So I got to go to his classroom early in the morning and help him pick out his socks for the day. And literally, like, one day he was handing back our notes because we all had to like take notes in class or something. And he would review every so often to make sure we were actually taking notes. And he was handing back our notes one day, and he like announced in front of the class that my handwriting was so slanty, he fell off his desk when grading them. And I was mortified. It was like a lighthearted joke, but I was like, oh my gosh, I love you, and I make you fall off your desk because my handwriting is too slanty, which of course I knew he wasn't like actually falling off his desk, but it was the fact that my handwriting was slanty enough for him to make a joke about it in front of my entire class. I started staying up until 2:00 in the morning for the rest of the semester, rewriting my notes over and over and over again to try to make my handwriting less slanty. And so now in that story, he is the villain. Like, oh my gosh, that poor 15, 16-year-old girl you had up until 2:00 in the morning rewriting her notes to please you when you probably didn't even care. Like, it just wasn't that serious. Am I ever going to track him down and tell him this? No, he has absolutely no idea. He never had any idea. So it's like, he never even made a comment to say like, oh, your handwriting got less slanty. He probably didn't notice a difference between the beginning of the semester and the end of the semester, because it was just a random off the cuff one-time comment for him, and then it was gone. For me, this comment was ingrained in my brain to the point where I'm now 31 years old and still talking about it. Like, it was that formative to me. It was that big of a deal. And you never know what it is that you're saying or doing that somebody else is going to latch on to in that way. So it's really not worth your time or energy to go out of the way to try to always be perfect or always do the thing that you think is going to make everyone else happy, because there just isn't a thing that's going to make everyone else happy. And you also can't force the ending that you want. Like, if your vision is like, once I have 2.5 kids and a dog and a ranch house with this many square feet, that's going to be my happily ever after. I promise you it's not. Like, if there's a specific thing that you can write down on paper that's like, once I have all these things, I'm going to be done, there's always going to be more things. Like, the bar is just going to raise. So I very strongly encourage you to just live in the moment as much as humanly possible and find the joy in all of the things around you and embrace the sadness. Okay, moving into the hard conversation of the week. It was with my boss. I know that I've talked about hard conversations with him before, but I actually did something different this time. So hopefully that's encouraging to somebody out there. But so basically, one of the things that my boss and I butt heads a lot on is the way that he gives negative feedback. Like, I am the type of person that I will own my mistakes. I have no problem doing that. And even if I'm in a situation where somebody else made the mistake, but I just have to take the fall for it to keep the thing on track and moving, I will do that too. But if somebody is accusing me of something that I very clearly did not do, and me just accepting it is not keeping the thing on track and moving it, I'm like, all right, now I need a very clear explanation of like, what actually happened and what are you requesting that I do differently? Like, if you're going to be giving me criticism, you need to be giving me criticism with like and here's what you can do better. And so the thing that I struggle with my boss is that he will often say like, XYZ happened and I didn't like it. And so, for example, there's a client that we were working on. We're working on a project, and my boss had met with the client prior to me coming on the project. So after I got introduced to the client, they were already in a rhythm of talking to my boss. So they were going to him a lot more often than they were going to me or to the two of us in a group chat. And then the same thing happened with the rest of the team, where like we hired a team of writers and designers to work on this project. And my boss had the initial meetings with all of them to explain like, here's what the project is, here's your role in it, here's how many hours we expect it to take you, that kind of stuff. And after he did all of that pre-work, he kind of handed it off to me to be able to manage. So I got thrown into it at a point where everybody had already kind of established my boss as the project manager. And there was never a point where he said like, and this project is now Samantha's, go to her. And so usually during the project, when he and I were meeting on our one-on-one, a lot of times he would say like, oh, so-and-so had this question about whatever, here's the answer that I gave them. And it was more just filling me in on a conversation that had already happened, as opposed to saying, I want you to manage this. They asked me this question. Here's the answer. Please send it to them so they know to go to you next time. And so the project is now long over. We're doing our like quarterly review, and he tells me that like we need to talk about that project that wrapped a few months ago. And he says that he feels like I totally disappeared, and he's just wants to make sure that we address this because he doesn't want to give me new clients if I'm going to disappear and not manage the project. And I'm sitting there like, okay, well, the reason that I did not manage the project, like, here's my like ABC. I'm like, first of all, you really had established yourself as the project manager, and there wasn't like, unless if people are coming to you with questions that you want them to bring to me, you have to tell them like, I'm not going to answer that, go to Samantha. Because if they come to you and you answer it and then you complain to me later that they went to you, how am I supposed to do anything about that? And then the second thing was one of the team members that we had on the project was also a project manager on a different account. So this is a person that functions sometimes as a writer, sometimes as an editor, sometimes as a project manager. So that also was difficult because usually the reason there's a project manager is that you're working with all these creatives that like they need all their time and space to be creative, to design and to write, and they don't like to think about timelines or deliverables or those things. So that's why you have the project manager in there to be that logistical brain of like, here's what needs to be done by this day, by this time, to make sure we're hitting milestones and getting things done. But so since the writer on the project was also a project manager and didn't need that kind of help, I was kind of like, okay, I don't really need to support. And then the third component was that the project kept ballooning, where the client was like wanting more and more things that we hadn't initially agreed to. And so it was going over budget. And then when I was having my weekly meetings with my boss, he was constantly complaining to me about how everybody was over hours and it was over budget and it was getting out of control. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, well, the writer is not done writing, so they can't leave the project. The designer is not done designing, so they can't leave the project. I do not have the skills to complete either of their components of it, but the writer is also a project manager. So the writer can manage herself and also help manage the designer. Plus my boss is already in here managing. We don't need 3 project managers on the account. So it'll be easiest for me to just step off this so that I stop submitting hours, and that will get the project less people will be over hours because I won't be on it at all. And I explain all of this to him, and he just kind of blinks and stares at me, and it just repeats what he had said initially. Like, well, you really disappeared from this project, and that's not going to work out in the future if this is going to keep happening. Like, we can't have this happen again. And so this has happened in the past where I feel like he just wants me to agree with him. And because I give like a rebuttal and say like, I'm actually totally justified in my behavior and here is why, he never responds to my justification to say, I agree with you or I don't. He just goes back to the beginning and repeats himself until I say like, you know what, you're right. I totally screwed this up. Like, I apologize. I'll do better next time. And then usually he'll say like, okay. And then that's the end of the conversation. But I was like, you know what? That doesn't help me. That doesn't make me like my boss. That doesn't make me want to work with him. And that really frustrates me. So this time, instead of taking the approach of repeating myself or just agreeing with him, I said, okay, I hear that you're frustrated with me because you think that I disappeared from this project. I have explained to you why I was not super involved in this project. And a lot of it had to do with things that you did not hand off to me. Like, are you hearing that part? And he said like, well, you know, if I have to take responsibility for something that went on here, I will. But at the end of the day, you disappeared. And I was like, okay, so what is it specifically that you need me to do differently on a future project? And he said, I need it to run like you're like the other client you have, where I don't worry about anything and everything's just done and nobody's coming to me with questions. And I said, okay, great. Let's come up with something specific to make that happen. And he said, okay. And I said, so if part of the issue that you're having is that people are asking you questions that they should be asking me, then in the future, I need you to respond to them with Ask Samantha. Period. That's your whole response, is Ask Samantha. She's your project manager. Go to her. And then if I don't know the answer and I need you, I will pull you in, but I need you to train the people to go to me. And if you kick off the project with the client and the team before you bring me in, then I need you to tell the client and the team, I am now handing this off to Samantha. She is the project manager. Go to her. More ideally, you would not kick anything off with the client or the team. You would have me in from the very beginning, let me talk to the client, establish that I'm a project manager, and then let me talk to the team, again, with you not there. But if you're going to be there, I need you to only be there to reinforce that I am managing the project. And he said, okay, good plan. And like, that was the end of the meeting. And this was like, I've never had anything end that well with him. And maybe this was his plan all along, as maybe he thinks I'm just not assertive enough. But also I feel like I shouldn't have to, like, I don't want to talk to my boss that way. You know, I'm sitting there like, you are my boss. If you're telling me that you're going to manage this project, who am I to say, no, it's mine? I'm just like, okay, well, you're my boss and you give me work. So if you want to take the work for yourself, how am I supposed to stop you? Like, that's always been my mentality. But I did talk to one of my friends and they were like, why don't you just try something different than what you've ever done before? So I was like, you know what? Fine. I'll be assertive and I'll be like, you want me to take it? I'll take it. Like, I don't care. But like, you could also have easily just given it to me. Like, it's just, I hate the like games you have to play in corporate America. It's ridiculous. But it did work in the end. So the whole purpose in telling that hard conversation is that if you are repeatedly having the same hard conversation with somebody in your life, try taking a totally different approach and see if that gets you different results. Moving into what I'm watching / reading right now, movie, TV, book recommendations. Okay, I'm going to start with the book. It's called The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. I can't remember the author's name. Sorry, but just Google The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. I don't really know how to describe it other than to say it's different. It was completely unexpected. It was a regular fiction novel. The main character's 19, so I think that would be classified as new adult. Definitely not YA, but it's not spicy, so I don't even fully know. I guess maybe new adult sci-fi because it's in space, but there's no there aren't any like aliens or anything. So like what constitutes sci-fi? I don't know. Anyway, it's very different. It's very unexpected. I thought it was very interesting. So that is a book that I recommend. I also recommend Radical Candor because that is a book that I'm reading. It's about like how to be a better boss, how to be a radically candid manager. And it's just all about like how to give feedback. And I'm reading it both to help me be a better manager, but also to help me interact better with my manager. And it helped because I'm only a couple chapters into this book and I had this one-on-one with my boss and I did something that went better than things have gone in the past and was very clear about like, here's what I need from you. So hopefully it was that book that helped me. Okay, TV shows. I am in the final season of Private Practice. Thank God. I think it's 6 seasons. Season 5 was painful. I'm like very over it. I'm kind of having the same experience that I have with Grey's, where I'm just like, oh, I'm so close to the end. I just have to finish, but I really don't want to. So I really only recommend Private Practice to if you are a Grey's Anatomy fan and you love Amelia, but you've never watched Private Practice, you should totally watch it because her whole backstory is on that show. If you are a fan of Grey's and you hate Amelia, you should totally watch Private Practice because I cannot stand her on Grey's, but she's my favorite character on Private Practice. I just love her character is done so well. It's amazing. And then let's see, movies. I can't even remember what movies I would have been watching 2 weeks ago. Well, The Amazing Spider-Mans. If you haven't watched those, watch those. I think usually I was talking to one of my friends and I was like, oh, I can't believe I've never seen these. But it's also like we were the Tobey Maguire era. And I think when like Andrew Garfield's movies first came out, everybody was like, why did they make Spider-Man again? Like we already did this. And we really liked Tobey Maguire's and we're like, why? And I think that had a lot to do with like why Andrew's movies failed so hard at the box office because we were like, nobody asked for this. And then Tom Holland came around where everybody was obsessed with the MCU and everybody was obsessed with Iron Man. And that connection to Tom Holland Spider-Man like made him really popular. But Andrew Garfield was slept on because his movies are so good. The other thing that last movie I saw in the theater was It Ends With Us. It's fine. Honestly, I mean, I know I was going to say the book is better than the movie, and I just know all the people are going to roll their eyes and be like, the book is always better than the movie. I don't think that's true. I do not think the book is always better than the movie. John Green movies and books, for example, I think every film/TV adaptation of a John Green book is exactly on par with the book. Like I think The Fault in Our Stars book and movie, pure perfection. I have no problems with either of them. And same with all of his. Like I think they're all great. Twilight is a classic example of like we made a terrible movie from a great book, but at 31, I think Twilight's a terrible book. So I used to reread Twilight every year. I haven't read it in a while, so I'll have to read it back and see if I still think it's bad or if I think it's good. But that one's debatable. So I feel like there are examples of like great books that become great movies, and there are examples of great books that become terrible movies. I do think It Ends With Us is a great book. That being said, I'm a huge Colleen Hoover fan, and I know that a lot of people don't like her. So it really depends on like what writing style you like and what you like in a book. The thing that Colleen is amazing at is the gut punch. Like she really makes you love characters and will pull the rug and be like, just kidding, you hate them. I like that. Like I like getting that emotionally invested in a story. So I really, really love It Ends With Us, the book. The movie was just very boring to me. And I think it had to do with the book has, it's kind of telling two stories at once. So there's like present day Lily and then past Lily, and present day Lily keeps like she's like reading her journals from when she was a teenager, and so you're like learning about what's going on in her present day life, and then she reads the journal entry from the past, and it's very slowly unraveling like what happened in the past. In the movie they do the same thing like by way of flashback, but there's just less mystery to it, I guess. Like I really felt like when I read the book, it was mysterious and I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? Like what happened? And so it's possible that that was gone from watching the movie just because I already knew what happened from reading the book. But I also was just like, I felt like a lot of the scenes were way too long and nothing was happening. I was just like, okay, can we speed this along? And that's the other thing I think Colleen Hoover does really well is her books really move. Like every scene is moving the story and it just feels like time passes really quickly. I always read Colleen's books in like a single 4 to 5 hours sitting because they're just so movement oriented. It's great. And the movie felt like the opposite. Like I was sitting there checking my watch, like, when is this going to end? And I was like, oh my gosh, it's been 45 minutes and we have like a lot left to do. Like nothing has happened. It's been an hour. Nothing has happened. Like when is the stuff going to start happening? So I don't know. I gave it 2.5 stars on Letterboxd because I was like, it's a movie. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It has characters. It has the actors are good. The script is fine. And nothing blew me away, but it's not bad. It just, I was like, I could take a nap. I wish I hadn't paid to see it, but it is what it is. That's all I got today. Thanks for listening. If you have questions, comments, concerns, or want to chat, reach out to realhonestpod@gmail.com. Look out for new episodes, give or take, every Wednesday at 6 a.m. Central.
I'm not here to sugarcoat, life's already a bumpy road. Too much shelter causes pain, let's just be real honest. Things are gonna knock you down, avoidance will not help you out. Let's talk it through, here me and you, let's keep it real honest.